Hello and welcome back to the Cambrian Virtual Show, the show that we're running between the 22nd and the 29th of March. Not March, May. It's I'm still waking up. There we go. So from the 22nd to the 29th of May, we're doing on average 3 speakers a day, guest speakers that are going to be attending throughout this 7-day event. Also, you'll be able to see the pre-records that we've done previously on our other live videos. And also you can see all the upcoming live stream videos that we're going to be doing on our website, which is www.cambrianphoto.co.uk. Click on the Photo and Optic 2020 link, and that'll take you to see all the speakers that we've previously done, and also all the previous ones and the ones coming up live, or you can follow the link in the description, which I'm just about to post now. There we go. Also, we're very excited to say that all the videos that we're going to be doing, all the live streams, are going to be available for free. Thank you very much for all the speakers donating their time to let us do this. It's absolutely fantastic. And because of this as well, we're asking for donations, which once again, you can go onto our website and hit the donate button on there. Also, you can follow the link in the description here. There we go. All profits to the donations will go to chosen charities and also local food banks as well. So thank you very much for that. Coming up later, we will have Gareth Jones. We're going to be doing a live Q&A with Gareth. Very much looking forward to that, digging into his sort of photography and sort of how he's sort of grown into the photography that he is today. But now, very excited, one of our customers, Andy Howe, has actually prepped a beautiful video for us, explaining a little bit about how to digitize old slides and negatives from your camera. It's a pre-recorded video, but we're going to play it live, so anyone that's watching can sort of add their comments and questions, and we can get to them in time. Without further ado, let me introduce Andy for you.
Hi, my name's Andrew Howe. I'm a customer of Cambrian Photography. And over the last 12 months or so, I've been experimenting with using my digital camera to record and capture negatives and slides. If, like me, you've been around a while and you started with film photography, or you've inherited boxes of negatives and become your family archivist, or perhaps you're someone who's only recently come to analog photography, requires some way of trying to digitize those images so that you can share them with the rest of your family and use them as you would with your digital images, as well as having those analog records. Through my experimentation, I've come up with a setup and a workflow that I'm going to share with you today. And I'm going to focus on color negatives because they're actually the most difficult. So all the things that apply for color negatives apply to a lesser extent to either color slides or to black and white negatives. I'm also going to have a look at ways that you can sort of work your way into experimenting with this without any additional equipment. The setup that I have works for me, and it's quick and effective, but you don't need to make any real investment as long as you've got a digital camera and something to help you hold the negatives so that you can photograph them. As well as the capture process, I'm also going to show you my workflow, and I'm working in Lightroom, which is what I use to hold my primary catalog. So I'll show you the steps that I take once I get them into Lightroom to convert the negatives into a positive image, which is something that you can share. This is an overview of my setup. It's based around a copy stand from a firm called Kaiser. They're a well-known brand, one of the more expensive ones, but I found this one on eBay. Below that, we have a light box. It was useful because it has both a dimmer and the ability to set either daylight or tungsten levels. That gave me some options when it came to shooting. I'm using my Fuji XT-3, a good old-fashioned cable release and reduced vibration, a Tether Pro USB-C cable to link the XT3 to my iMac. The lens I'm using is the Zeiss Chewit 50mm 2.8. The Ninja 5 is a bit of a luxury. It's great for checking focus and reorienting the image so I can see it the right way up. Something I already have. It's not something that's strictly necessary. I'm using negative files which fit in a ring binder by a company called Howe, and they do lots of different types. I write on there the information about what's actually in there, and also apply a code to each one. As well as being the light source for my photography, the Lightbox also is useful for sorting the negatives and trying to identify what's on them. It can also be useful to have a loop so that you can get a magnified image of what's in there if you're trying to decide what the subject is to catalog the images. The adapter that I used primarily is the Nikon EOS 2, which I'm adapting to use with Fuji equipment. It's for negatives and for slides, and it comes as a set. It has some adjustability that's built into it, which can be useful for fine tuning. It just screws onto the end of the lens, although for the Chewit I need to use some step down rings to make it fit. Comes with adapters for slides and negatives. The slides literally just slide in from the top. Then the negative ones are a kind of clamping design, which will take up to 6 negatives. Another option I use is called a digitalizer and comes from Lomography, and they do this in different negative sizes. This is for either using in a scanner, or you could use it as I'm doing with a Lightbox. Here's a much simpler setup where I'm using my XT4 with the AS2 and a Viltrox soft LED light, both of these mounted on tripods. If you search, you'll find a lot of examples of alternative setups using either repurposed or DIY negative carriers. Negative Lab Pro is a plugin for Lightroom which I use to do the negative to positive conversion. This is a bit of an investment at $99, but there is a free trial, so you can try it before you choose to buy. The ES2 lists for about £180, which is pricey for what it is. I'd wait to catch it in a sale. The digitalizers are a lot more affordable, but they do tend to go in and out of stock a lot on the Lomography website. Perhaps the most difficult part of making your setup is finding the right lens. So I'll try and give you a little bit of guidance to work out whether any lenses that you have might be appropriate or whether you might need to look for something especially for this purpose. You may already have a dedicated macro lens, or perhaps you've got a macro lens for some of your vintage cameras, which you'd be able to adapt to your digital camera. Or you can use a non-specialized macro lens and try using things like extension tubes to get the magnification that you need. To be able to work out what will work, particularly with the adapter, then a little maths is required. The first thing that we need to look at is getting the right macro reproduction ratio. If you're shooting 35mm negatives on a full frame, then the ratio is 1:1, which is what most kind of true macro lenses will produce. But if you're using a crop frame camera, then you don't need quite such a high magnification because of that crop factor, and it'll be 1 to whatever the crop factor is. If you can't quite reach that ratio, then you can crop in post if you're prepared to sacrifice a little bit of resolution. If you're a Nikon user, then you'll find that the ES2 is designed to work with particular Nikon macro lenses, and it comes with adapters to fit those particular ones. And if you're lucky enough to have an 850, then it even has a negative to positive conversion built into the camera, albeit only to JPEG. To use the ES2 with other systems, we have to find a lens combination that's going to work within the same sort of length that Nikon lenses would have. So we need to try and figure out what that is. One of the things we need to be aware of is that many lenses are quoted with their focusing distance actually to the sensor plane, and that's usually marked like it is here on my XT3 on the side of the camera. And you also need to realize what the flange distance is, because that's going to be used in our calculations. My XT3 has a crop factor of 1.5, 0.67 of life size. And for a 50mm, that means it should be focusing at 208mm, which is within the focusing range of the lens. Then we need to check where the negative is actually going to be in relation to the sensor to find out the total length. Now, if we add all the different bits together, we see that we've got a potential range because of the adjustment on the adapter of 192 to 205, which is a little short of 208. But what I found was when we actually tested the lens that it did actually fit. So there's no substitute for trial and error and having a dealer who's happy to help you. So in summary, having a fixed length adapter makes lens choice a little more difficult compared to something like the digitalizer, where you can set your own distance. And it's worth giving the lenses that you have that might be suitable a good try before you move on to anything else. You're going to need to do perhaps a little bit of maths homework. I'd recommend getting yourself some white lint-free gloves for handling the negatives. This will avoid getting any fingerprints as you manipulate them into the adapters and into the files. If you're just starting to put your negatives in files, then my recommendation is not to push the negatives too far in, as that makes life rather difficult when you try and get them out again with the gloves. I wish I'd known that a little bit earlier. If you're using the digitalizer, then it uses a clever magnetic mechanism to keep the negative nice and flat once it's placed inside the adapter. If you open the adapter and remove the tensioning handle, place the negative carefully inside the adapter, give it a good blower brush just to make sure there's not adding any dust. Place it inside the adapter, close down the flattening handle. It's got little lugs which locate it. Close up the adapter and then lift off the tensioning handle and lift it away from the magnetic plate. One of the advantages that the digitalizer has, it allows you to see the frame numbers and film information actually on the negative strip. And one option you have is to not crop in to the actual negative itself, but include that additional information. The negative holder for the ES2 is a simpler clamshell kind of design. You need to put the negative in and try and line up the gaps between the individual photographs with the panes in there. It's best not to close it down too tightly at first, and then you can just sort of gently adjust the actual negative itself to line it up more closely. Use the blower brush to clean any dust that might be on the negatives. Check you're seeing the numbers the right way round. That's the emulsion side, which is what you want to photograph. Slide the negative carrier into the adapter and through until you get to the first photograph. This first blank shot will come in handy in post later. If we slide along to the next image, we're now going to check focus manually. And what I'm going to check is not actually the focus of the image, but I'm going to look for the focus on the grain. I want to see that clearly. I found it's okay to just check the focus once per strip. It seems to work fine. We'll take the picture of the final image, and then we'll move on to looking at how we deal with them in post. So I've come into Lightroom so that we can work on the pictures, but first of all, I'm just going to show you the settings that I'm using in the built-in Fuji software. So this is Fujifilm X Acquire, and when you've installed this program, which you can download for free from the Fuji site, then it'll show up here in your menu bar. Then you'll be able to change some settings which control how the camera will work when it's tethered to the computer. In this case, it's to my iMac. One of the first things you need to set is where you want those pictures to be recorded. At the moment, I've just got this going to a flash drive, which I plugged in just to make it a little bit easier to find. But you choose the location, and that can be anywhere that you want, either on your computer or on an external drive. The other thing that you want to check is the preferences that you have. So I've got the camera plugged in via the USB-C port, and I have just RAWs coming in because that's what I'm interested in this case. And I don't have anything set in the link software. There's all sort of open software when files are imported, but I found that it tries to open multiple copies with Lightroom, so I don't tend to have that set. An additional option on Fuji Acquire is to show a window that shows you the current settings that are actually on your camera. This confirms that the camera is communicating with the computer, and it also helps you confirm all your settings. I'm just going to change a setting on the camera, and hopefully it should show us that change happening live. In terms of the settings that I use, then I tend to use the native ISO of 160. I don't tend to go down into the extended kind of low range ones. And I'm usually looking to try and get an aperture of about f8 and trying to move it into the sweet spot of the lens, and also make sure that you've got good coverage, and if any focus issues that you might have due to kind of field curvature are ironed out by having small aperture without getting to the point where you're starting to bring in diffraction. And the white balance I actually have set at sunny. This is because on the light table that I'm using as my light source, I have the option to set what the output level is, and I have set that to 5500 Kelvin. By setting the white balance to match that light, I'm making sure that any color casts that are in there are due to the kind of negative substrate, and that allows me to kind of accurately manage to extract it and get a consistency across all the images, so that I can do that subtraction on all the images, and I can be sure that the white balance hasn't changed at some point while I've been taking the different pictures. The shutter speed isn't terribly important to me because I've got my setup kind of on the fixture on my copy stand. It's fairly steady, and I'm also using a cable release, and that cable release means that I'm minimizing any vibration that there might be in the camera. If there's a very dark image, then that shutter speed might get quite a bit slower, and it's the shutter speed that I tend to allow to be set automatically. If there's an image where, when I look at the histogram on the screen, that I can see that I might have issues, then I'd use the exposure compensation dial just to make sure that I'm sort of got all the information well within the bounds of the histogram. In Lightroom, I've been setting up folders for each year for the images that I'm scanning, and I've created this new one called Airshow, which is for the sample couple of files that I've taken, and that's where we're going to import it. So if I click on import, so I'm going to select the flash drive. And we can see that we've got 3 images in here to import. Now I'm going to be doing a move because I want to move them from the flash drive into the folder. And by moving them, it means each time that I do a new section, then this is clean and it's only the files that I need to import next, which are actually sat in there. So if we go into the folder structure here, we can see that we have this airshow one. That's where I want it to go. Just make sure I don't have a subfolder selected. So you can see that it's going to go into airshow. And I've clicked import. So now I have my 3 files. I'll just move over here to airshow. I'm just going to make the thumbnails a bit bigger as we only have a couple of files in here. Now, normally I would go through and I'd actually do the entire film that was in that file in one go, but the principles, once you've got sort of more than one thing to import, are pretty much the same. Just so for speed, I'm just going to do a few images here. Now, one of the things that you may wonder is why I've bothered to import the kind of blank leader shot of that film, because even when I was photographing, it was clear there was nothing on it, but it does actually prove quite useful. And I'll show you how that works as we go through the workflow. So the other thing I can see is we've just got one image here, which needs to be the other way around. I can at this point now select all these files by doing Command A. So I can enter some keywords that are kind of specific to this role. So these are all things that I'd written on the negative file. Thanks to my younger self for thinking to do that at the time, because when you're trying to do these things 40 years later or so, then it's quite difficult to remember all the specifics. I'm now going to add some keywords which are common to all of these images, and the code that I've written on my negative sheet is 198304. I've set those things, and this will make it easier if I see an image that I want, and maybe I think I need to do a bit more work on it or do something else with it. It lets me kind of find it relatively easily by going back to the negative file. Okay, so the next steps, we need to move to the develop room. So the first image that I'm going to actually choose, although we've got all 3 here selected, is I'm going to go to the blank one. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to use this as my background color, because the first step that we need to do is to set the white balance. So if I take the white balance tool and click on here on a nice even area, and then I'm going to sync these settings to all the other ones, and I've got just white balance set on my synchronization. So those are now synchronized. So now I want to move to an image which is a little more indicative of how I want it to look in the end. We can see in here, despite my best efforts with the burrow brush, there's still quite a lot of dust on here. So the golden rule really is the more time you actually spend making sure that the negative is in a good condition before you scan it, the less time you spend in post trying to fix those issues. Of course, sometimes negatives have been scratched or something like that, and therefore the post-processing is probably your only way of actually fixing those issues so that you can get both a nice digital image, but also a nice image to print should you want to make a physical copy again. We need to come to Negative Lab Pro. Come in here by going into the plugin extras, and you can see here that Negative Lab Pro installs as one of the plugins in this little submenu. But you can also see against it that Control N is actually kind of hotkey that's been applied. Once you've memorized it, kind of speeds up the workflow process. Okay, so you can see that it's because we've got those images all selected, but there's 3 negatives to convert. Now we're doing color negatives here. Inside here it gives you a choice of the color modes. So the ones that in here are Noritsu and Frontier. Now I believe these are high-end lab scanners that you might find in a professional scanning thing, so that emulates the results that you would get from those two. So these two are for color, and then for black and white films there's a separate import here, but I have mine set to Frontier. And then the others I've left at their sort of default settings. Click convert on the negatives, and I'll let this run in real time so you get a feeling for how long it actually takes to render each of the images. So now that we're actually into the image, it switches into the edit mode. At the moment, I'm not going to edit these while I've got them all kind of selected in a group. I'm going to first of all just apply here, make sure that I've just got a single image selected, and now I'm going to go in and go to Control N, and because we've already imported this image, it jumps quickly to the edit menu. So you've actually got a lot of things in here that you can control. The first is this setting, which is presets. And it's a good idea to kind of come in here and play with things. I've found that for the Fuji, the linear plus gamma works quite well, but it does depend a lot on what the nature of the image is. And I can save any settings that I've put in here as my defaults, and that'll what be applied on any future imports. But sometimes you find that other presets might work particularly well for a set of images or a particular kind of film. And in here you've got some levels. Why might I want to do that in here rather than doing it in Lightroom? See here, if I sort of break up that image, darken down that image, sort of boost the contrast, maybe lift the shadows a little bit, and then I can adjust hues in here, or I can go down to a very fine detail with mids, highs, and shadows. Now there are some very good tutorials, and I'm not going to go in too deep on Negative Lab Pro. It's got a very active Facebook group, which is well worth having a look at. And there's quite a few supplementary things on YouTube that people have done, which go into far more detail. I'm going to leave it at that for now on this particular image. Now, the reason why it's best to get the image kind of how you like it in Negative Lab Pro before you do anything in Lightroom is because underlying here, you're still dealing with a negative. Very strange things start to happen with some of the controls. So for instance, if I move my exposure to the right, which I'd expect to brighten it, it goes dark. So if I try and boost my highlights, I'm actually kind of affecting more the shadows. You're in a strange sort of backwards world. But there are some other things that you can use, and it's worth trying with these just to see whether you feel they add or not. So texture works, dehaze also can be quite useful, although that one is slightly opposite to what you'd expect. And also things like vibrance work fine, and you can use your curves. Obviously, the color controls are very much going to be at the mercy of the reversal process. So you can do these, but they might not work how you expect. But kind of through trial and error, you can still adjust those colors. And it's part of what deep does, that it actually puts some split toning on by default. You've also got kind of sharpening. I'd probably raise a mask on that, because what you don't want to do is really sharpen the grain. Now you could go in here and use noise reduction to remove the grain, but to me that sort of takes away a little bit from what a film negative gives you. So I'm trying to get something which would be close to what would happen if I printed the image. So I like to kind of not use any noise reduction. You're trying to, kind of use your lowest ISO in the camera so that you're not introducing any noise from the camera itself, or at least minimize that. So what you see in here when we go in is actually the physical grain on the negative. You still got access to things like your brush tools if you want to go in and start sort of fixing some of the bits of dust that the blower brush didn't get off. Just have a look at this other image. So I'm going to see how it looks with linear deep and gamma. I think I prefer that to try and brighten up the interior of the plane a little bit. Bring the highlights down. It's looking just apply the mask. As you can see, when you first start, there's a lot of sharpening that's happening on the actual grain. Let's move it to the point where that sort of disappears. Just play with dehaze to see whether that has any effect. I'm going to add a bit of texture and clarity, vibrance to this one. Change the crop just a little bit to get rid of that stripe in the corner. Just have a little look for the worst of the dust blobs. So you could do a lot more cleaning up with this, perhaps sort of checking around, looking for any particular sort of bad little dust blobs and moving those. It really depends on sort of what you want to do with this image. If your plan is just to get them converted, just to see what's in there, you have the option to kind of come back later and clean it up if you perhaps want to do a print. And of course, once it's digitized, then that gives you the option to kind of share the image. Which point, kind of you want to use your normal process for whatever you do to sort of highlight things. If you're using like a numbering scheme to say, oh, these are the images that I want to take further, perhaps sharing or adding to collections, etc. Now we don't actually have any people in these shots. I have been using the people functionality within Lightroom to collate together pictures, particularly of my family members, so that I can see which pictures I've got of them. I've found that doesn't work too well with the scanned images, because I think the Lightroom scanning function struggles with anything that's a negative, because it just doesn't see the faces. So I just use the sort of keywording functionality to recognize the people. The face detection doesn't pick up. I hope you've found this video useful, and if you have any questions, then please leave them in the comments, and I'll try to answer them. If you're interested in digitizing more widely, not just negatives, but also things like prints, and you're looking for multiple different approaches that you might take to that, depending on what equipment that you already own, then I've been following along with Derek Story's Digitizing Family Memories. If you search for Negative Lab Pro in YouTube, you'll see a lot of different things coming up. As you can see, there's plenty of additional material that you can look at to see how the software works in more detail, and also people who've taken different approaches to getting the images in that file. It might be using different kinds of camera, or it might be using different scanning devices and lots of different setups. This would be quite a good place to start. Nate Photographic is the publisher of Negative Lab Pro, so that's one you should definitely look at. I just point out this one from Matt Day. He was one of the first people I saw who is using this approach. That was one that got me interested in using my DSLR to actually capture the images.
What a brilliant video from Andy Howe there. Absolutely amazing. I know Andy's following in the comments below as well. So he has put in there, if you've got any questions about any of the things that he went through, just pop them in the comments and I'm sure he'll be happy to answer them as well. Andy, thank you very much for that video that you've sent to us. I know we've discussed it sort of in the shop, and it's really nice to see of all the little sort of stepping rings that you've been buying and things like that, to actually see what it's been for as well. So big thank you for sending that over to us so we could share it with everyone, and hopefully we can start digitizing some of our own catalogs now. I know I've got some black and white negatives that I need doing, so it gives me a good start to get going on that. So big thank you there. Also, sort of later on today at 3 p.m. today, we will be having Gareth Mon-Jones in for a live Q&A. So get your questions ready for Gareth. We will be going through sort of his journey through photography and how he's sort of progressed and things like that. So that's going to be brilliant to catch up with Gareth live with you guys. And also to everyone that's watching, so big thank you to everyone that is watching live and commenting. It really does help. If you're watching this sort of after the fact, so if you're watching the replay of this, you can still like, comment on the video. Any comments that are on there, we will be checking them. So if you've got any questions, we will be going back through our videos to make sure that hopefully all the questions have been answered. And also, if you can share the videos as well with sort of anyone that would be interested in them, that's brilliant. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube page, and also click the bell for notifications, because we've got lots more live videos coming up. So you would get a notification as soon as we go live on YouTube. From me for now, that is everything, and we will see you later on when we are going live with Gareth Mon-Jones. See you later. Bye bye.